Good morning, Algebra 2 students. This is video 2, which is on graphing the cosine function. We're going to do exactly what we did yesterday. We're going to get the parent graph for the cosine, and then we will not do an XY chart after that. We'll just use the graph. So again, the angles that we are going to use, our critical number on the x-axis, are going to be our quadrantal angles of 0, pi over 2, pi, 3/2 pi, and we're back at 2 pi. And again, on the unit circle, we know the radius is 1, so we know our ordered pairs are 1, 0, 0, 1, -1, 0, 0, -1. So what we need to do then is set up an XY chart for the cos, remembering that the cos is the x value on the unit circle ordered pairs. So at 0, the cos is at 1. At pi over 2, the cos is at 0. At pi, the cos is at -1. At 3/2 pi, the cos is at 0. And at 2 pi, we're back at 1. So if we look at that graph then and how it differs from the sine graph, at cos, you are at, I'm going to put the critical numbers down here, pi over 2, pi, 3/2 pi, and 2 pi. Remember, there's always 5 critical numbers. The first one, until we start shifting, will be the 0. So at 0, we're at 1. At pi over 2, we are at 0. At pi, we're at -1. At 3/2 pi, we're at 0. And at 2 pi, we're back at 1. And again, this is one cycle of the cos graph. Different than the sine graph started at 0 and had more of an S shape. This is the cos graph, which starts at its amplitude. Its highest point goes to 0, goes to its lowest point, goes to 0, and goes to the highest point. Again, the period is the length of one cycle. Remember, this goes on and on infinitely, both to the left and the right. We're just saying one cycle, or what we call one period. And just like the sine, at 2 pi, it would start repeating the same graph that we see here. And again, its amplitude is its height above the axis, and it goes one up and one down, so we let our amplitude be 1. And there is your parent graph for the cos. So again, once we know that graph, there's no longer a need for XY charts, so we're not going to worry about this. We're simply going to look at an equation that has an a value, which is the a is multiplied by the function, the cos, and that's an amplitude change. It stretches the graph. So the a in this case for y equals 3 cos x, the a is 3. That's going to be your amplitude change. The period, there is no, if you did the sine homework, the period is a number multiplied by the angle or multiplied by the x. That's your b number. I don't have that. That's a 1x. So my period will just stay 2 pi. So my critical numbers do not change because there's no period change. 0, pi over 2, pi, 3/2 pi, and 2 pi. But different than yesterday, at 0, a cos graph starts up at its amplitude. Then it goes to 0. And again, notice I went to 3 because we had an amplitude change. Then at pi, I'm at -3. At 3/2 pi, I'm at 0. And at 2 pi, I'm at 3. So there is my graph. If I look at the next one, again, we don't need an XY chart. I have an amplitude and a value of 1/2. So that's actually going to shrink the graph. It's going to make it shorter. But the period, there is no period change. So it's 2 pi. So again, we'll just put our original critical numbers, which are our quadrantal angles. And the first one always being 0. And now we have an amp of 1/2. So at 0, we'd be at 1/2. At pi over 2, we're at 0. At pi, we're at -1/2. 3/2 pi, we're at 0. And at 2 pi, we're at 1/2. And again, there's one cycle of the cos graph. Just like yesterday, when there is a number multiplied by the angle, that's called b, and that number changes the period. and we have the same formula we had yesterday. Our period is changed by the formula 2 pi divided by that b. So in an equation that looks like this, 2 cos 4 theta, my amplitude is 2. That's your A value. This is your B value. So my period would be 2 pi divided by 4, which is pi over 2. When you have a period change, you have a change in your critical numbers, which is what we talked about yesterday. And we talked about the fact that there are 5 total critical numbers, but the first one is 0. So I need 4 more numbers. So in order to get that, I'm going to take my period and divide it by 4 to get the additional 4 numbers. So it's pi over 2 divided by 4, which would be pi over 2. And when you divide, you multiply by the reciprocal. So I'm going to flip the 4 upside down, and I get a critical number change of pi over 8. So this is what we're going to add each time to get our critical numbers. So we start at 0. 0 plus 1/8 is 1/8 pi. 1/8 plus 1/8 is 2/8, which is, hopefully we all know that's pi over 4. 2/8 plus 1/8 is 3/8. And 3/8 plus 1/8 is 4/8, which hopefully everyone knows is pi over 2. So those are our critical numbers, and we're doing a cos graph AMP2. So if we're doing a cos graph AMP2, we would start at 0. At 0, we'd start up at 2. Pi over 8, we're at 0. Pi over 4, which is 2/8 pi, we're down at -2. 3/8 pi, we're at 0. 4/8 pi, I'm at a half. So there is a cos graph, AMP2, period pi over 2. So if I look at the next one, now I have an AMP number of a -4. And if you remember, we talked about that yesterday when the A is negative in all of our functions, whether it be a parabola, the exponential, the logs, radicals, all the functions that we've studied, it reverses the graph. So this is going to be an upside down or a reversed graph because of that negative A. And again, theta over 2 is the same as -4 cos 1/2 theta. So while my A number is -4, my B number is 1/2. So my period is 2 pi divided by B, which would be 2 pi times 2 over 1, which is 4 pi. Once I change my period, I have to change my critical numbers. And I need 4 more of them, so I'm just going to go 4 pi divided by 4, which is pi. And this is what you're just going to add every time. So we're going to start at 0, and then I'd add pi, so that's 1 pi. I'd add pi again, I'd be at 2 pi. Add pi again, I'd be at 3 pi. Add pi again, I'd be at 4 pi. And I have a cos graph, reverse AMP4. So at 0, you're going to start at the -4. Then you're going to go to 0. Then you're going to go to +4. Then you're going to go to 0. Then you're going to go back to -4. So it's simply a cos graph flipped upside down. So just like yesterday, and again, this is supposed to say cos equations, so I apologize. We're trying to write cos equations for a cos graph with amplitude 2 and period pi. So I know my A is 2, and I know my period, which is equal to 2 pi over B, is equal to pi. And I just need my B. So I have a proportion if I put that pi over 1, and I'm just going to cross multiply. 2 pi equals B pi, divide by pi, and I get a B of 2. So if my A is 2 and my B is 2 and my equation looks like this, I would simply sub 2 for my A and 2 for my B. Or if I told you the amplitude was 0.5 and the period, which is 2 pi over B, is equal to pi over 4. I would just cross multiply 8 pi equals b pi, and I would simply divide by pi, and I would get b equals 8. So my equation, my a is 0.5, and my b is 4. And that would be my equation. We can also do that looking at graphs. We did this yesterday. If you remember, yesterday we kind of showed you like a many sine graphs. The one I'm showing you right here is just one cos graph. You can see the shape of it. Hopefully you can see that this is a reverse amp, because normally the cos starts at its high amp. This is starting at its low amp. So its amp number is a -12. And I do have to get the b. So again, just like yesterday, start at 0 and trace one cos graph, which should be there. And if you look at this graph, each one of these is divided 1/4, 2/4. Sorry, I can't read that very good. I have to erase that a little bit. I can't tell what that number is. It looks like pi over 5. So our period is, we're just going to let it be. It's hard to read what it is, but we're going to say that the period is pi over 5. So if that's my period, then I simply would go my period, which is 2 pi over b, is equal to pi over 5. And I would cross multiply 10 pi equals b pi. I would divide by pi, and I would end up with 10 equals b. So there's my b, there's my a. My equation would be -12 cos 10x. And again, I think that's 1/5. It's a little hard to read, but hopefully the ones in your homework will be clear. So if I look at b, I have a cos graph, and I know it's a cos graph because it starts up. Remember, sine graph from yesterday started on the axis. So this is one cos graph right there. And if you look at how that's divided, this is 1/3. This would be 2/3. And then this would be 3/3. And that's how we're going to let it be, because I can't read this right here. But we're going to assume this is 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. So our period is pi. And again, hopefully your homework worksheet will be clear. It's a little hard to read this on here. But we're just going to assume that that's at pi. And again, my amp number is 3.5. My period is formula 2 pi over b, and the period is pi. So I would cross multiply 2 pi equals b pi. I would divide by pi, and I would get a b of 2. So my equation would be 3.5 cos 2 theta. Again, those were a little bit hard to read. I hope your homework is a little bit clearer. I think those are all that you need. I think most of these are just exactly the same as what I just showed you. So if you have any questions, please send a note to me either through email or through Teams. These notes are also online in the note section where they're always found. This is a video, and the notes are filled in for you like they always are under Files in your Algebra 2 page, MyCMH. Your homework is also going to be under Files in MyCMH. That's where the homework worksheet is. And again, as I mentioned to you, you're going to do 2 through 22 evens, 32, 33. Any questions, please let me know. Also, the answers for the sine graph homework are going to be under Files, MyCMH. If you would please check your signs, make sure you don't have any questions on that. And make sure you check in today so I can count you in the attendance. So have a good day. Good luck on all this. Bye now.